We are live. There's 6 people on. Welcome, everybody. I hope I am audible. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. That's great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Khao Palelwe Palaitzile, but you can call me Khao. I am the Digital Campaigns Manager at Rise Mzansi, and I have the pleasure today of bringing you the national leader, Songezo Zibi, to just go through our People's Manifesto. I mean, it's 68 pages. We can't go through the whole 68 pages, but he's obviously going to focus on some of the priorities we have in this manifesto and why it's important for Rise Mzansi. And I think for me, I have always been curious about why the leadership was such a priority. And it's the first section really of the manifesto. And it would be great to hear from him specifically why this direction. I'm going to give the floor to him to just go through the conceptualization of the Rise Mzansi Manifesto and why we specifically prioritize the things that we do. The stage is yours, sir. You can go ahead.
How thanks very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So, I am not going to go through the whole manifesto, but I'm going to do three things. The first is going to explain how it was constructed, is talk about why it was constructed that way, and then talk about the priorities set out therein. So, how was the manifesto constructed? So, when we launched in April last year, we published a document called Our Politics, and that document was important because it set out a political and ideological frame which set out certain principles for how we wanted to do politics. I will give a couple of examples. The first is that we said we believe in the principles of the South African Constitution, especially Chapter 2 of the Constitution. Now, that means we endorse the Bill of Rights. That means we endorse marriage equality, for instance. It means we do not believe in the death penalty and so on. Such a framing is important because there are people whose political views involve the death penalty. They don't want South Africans who are queer to get married and so on. And it's important that you say upfront what you are going to, what you believe in at a principle level. There are also people who believe that there should be no private enterprises in South Africa. We don't believe there should be no private enterprises in South Africa. South Africans are very enterprising, and therefore we're going for a mixed ownership economy level where the government is an active regulator and participant in the economy under certain principles and clear rules of engagement, because there's also conflict in being a regulator and a participant at the same time. So we needed to set out all of these things so that it is clear what kind of choices we would make and who engages with us and why. So that was important. And with that base in mind, we set out to speak to South Africans from all walks of life. What we wanted to achieve was an outcome where our political program before and after the elections speaks and sounds like the issues that people deal with every day. Because we are solving a particular problem with it, and that is politics has become too abstract, it has become too high minded, and the things that people deal with every day are not framed in the way that people express them to their family and friends on a daily basis. So it was important that we set out that level of simplicity. We went out on a listening tour. We call that the Rise from Mzansi tour from the beginning of April. And we were asking people lots of what we would call stupid questions. But most importantly, what is most important to you politically? And we always emphasize that what affects you personally is most probably a political issue as well. And so we do not have political issues and social issues. The social issues are political. We don't have political issues and economic issues. The economic issues are political. We also, to the extent that people have things that affect them in their families, that is also framed in the context of politics. What do I mean? Some families might say that we come from an abusive home where the father is abusive, or one of the parents is abusive, or whatever, or somebody is affected by drugs. It's affecting our family in this or that way. That's important politically, because that's not the only family that is affected that way. There are many, many more families that way. Some people are entrepreneurs or would like to be entrepreneurs. They don't have support and so on. So it's important that you speak to people, you listen very carefully to how they formulate the issues. And then when you speak and you formulate your political program, it sounds exactly like the way people are framing those things. So that was important. The second is our own analytical skills. We accept that you have a situation where people often ask for solutions, a technical solution, but a lot of the time, the problem that really affects South Africa is leadership, right? And that means you can have as many technical solutions as you like. What you are not going to be able to do is to implement those successfully if you do not have the right people in leadership. Let me make an example about something that we all understand, right? So ESCOM has not had a chief executive until recently. The inability to appoint a chief executive over a long period of time is not something that a policy can solve. It's a leadership choice. Transnet has not had a chief executive or an FD for a long time. Again, that is a leadership choice. It is not that is a leadership choice. It is not a policy problem. So there are issues where you need to get the right people to make the right decisions for the right reason, so that the simple basics that need to be done can be done. Let me take it further down to your community level, and that is there are only so many ways in which you can run a school. If schools are not being run properly, then you've got a problem. Now, do you need to have a policy? You might take a decision to capacitate school governing bodies, get the right principals, give them leadership training, and so on. So it was important that we also analyze what is wrong with South Africa, so that this combination of what people are telling us is able to join a set of interventions that can produce the outcome. So that's how we set about it. And we went to all 9 provinces. And one of the things I do, particularly, even on the campaign trail, now people think that people who don't do door to door and so on might think that you do not you only share with people your promises. We don't just share promises with people. I listen a lot. I take a lot of notes. Why is this important? It's important because when you get to parliament or a legislature, you have 2 opportunities. One, you can discuss the allocation of funds at budget time. There's a budget debate, there's ongoing appropriations. You have an opportunity to highlight issues that you feel should be given more attention, that they're not being given attention. The second is that MPs have the responsibility and the power of oversight. Now you are able to go to a police station, talk to the station commissioner with an official badge, and try and understand how the problems are being resolved, one. And secondly, if you as an MP can now use the access you have to the minister to discuss issues affecting a certain community, you can do that. So that's why it's important during a campaign trail to still listen to what people are saying, because you are now talking to things that you are then going to do in exercising your responsibilities as an MP. So we went around and we continue to listen, even though we have a manifesto. So let me deal with the priorities that are in the manifesto, and I will not deal with all of them, but I will just give a sense of the kind of things that are in our manifesto and how we have framed it. So I've spoken about leadership and governance. We have looked carefully at why governance has collapsed in South Africa, why we've got so much corruption, why we do not have the right people in the right roles, and so on. And decided that if we sort out the governance and leadership issues and management capability issues, we can solve, I believe, nearly half of all the problems we have. Because This is about exercising judgment, about distributing and allocating, distributing, and managing the financial resources of South Africans effectively. Now, that means, for instance, if you have a municipality that has got a finance division and all of them are supposed to have it, that finance division is able, together with their auditors, with the Auditor General's office, to put the financial statements together. When you hear that over and above the people that are being paid in a municipality, they've also spent tens of millions on a consulting company to help them to put their financial statements together, you've got a problem. It means you don't have the right people. So you need to solve that problem. I'm just making an example of the kind of problems that we have. So getting the right people into the right roles is important. And it's not something that you can just shout from the sidelines. The purpose of being in politics is to make sure that you give yourself an opportunity to influence those decisions, to conduct oversight. And one day, when you become the majority party, you govern in a coalition, you can practice what you preach. So leadership has been important. There is also a section where we deal with the individual, the family, and community well-being. This is really important. Let me make an example. So the majority of gender-wise, the majority of people that are unemployed in South Africa are women. There are many reasons why women constitute the majority of the unemployed across all age groups. But one of them is that for women with small children or mothers with small children, it is difficult to look for work if you do not have somebody who is going to look after your kids. It is equally difficult to keep a job if you do not have somebody who's going to look after your kids. It might appear to be a small structural issue, but it is important. That's one example. The second example is some people eventually give up on a job because they spend most of the income or the wages from that job on transportation and getting to and from work. What does that say to us? That says to us it is important to have daycare facilities, in particular in poorer communities. And these are municipal run daycare centers, which are also ECD facilities, early childhood development facilities. That takes you to a budget allocation and how that budget is going to be used. That's one example that I would like to make. The second example that I would like to make is that person I was talking about who spends a lot of their money on transport, they might be taking 3 taxis to get to work and 3 taxis to get back from work. They might be spending 50% of their income on trying to get to and from work. They've got too little to spend on food and other amenities and other needs that the family has. That leads us to the discussion about public transport and affordable public transport. And public transport is not just taxis. Public transport should be a transport infrastructure that is owned by the government, that is very affordable. So if you can reduce somebody's expense of getting to and from work from 100 Rand per day to 40 Rand per day, as an example, or 50 Rand per day through state infrastructure, now you've begun to put money back in somebody's pocket. So that's important. So we felt that's important. Now, the reason we said individual, family, and community well-being, as you can see, the need might be in the family, but in order for the need to be addressed, you need to address it all the way through to community level infrastructure, right? You start with the individual, it affects the family, and so on. Now, in the course of talking to people, people also tell you about other problems, such as, I'm not able to work because I've got a child or a brother with serious disabilities. I live in a rural area. Even if they have a wheelchair, there are no paved roads and things on which to try to kind of transport themselves. Now, that also speaks to what community infrastructure, but it leads me to one of the points that we've elevated, which is that the challenges of people with disabilities. Let me talk about the economy and just tackle 3 things quickly. The first is that South Africa's political discussion tends to believe that you need to always come up with some smart policy that nobody has thought of. In South Africa, we're not getting the basics right. Next time the Reserve Bank governor announces interest rates, if you have the chance, just read the Monetary Policy Committee statement only. It's basically his speech, they publish it. And I'll ask their colleagues at Rise Mzansi next time to just put it up on their website. The Reserve Bank always explains why the economy is not growing. As an example, what do they say? They say there's about 3 percentage points GDP growth between Eskom and Transnet. What does that mean? If electricity is unavailable, and when it's available, it is expensive, it's going to affect the viability of businesses. I know somebody I went to school with owns a KFC franchise outlet, and the power sometimes goes off during peak time. I think the place employs about 15 people. And if we can't solve that problem, then we've got a big issue. So we need to sort out electricity, and we can talk about that in the questions. That's one example. The second example is Transnet, where there are a lot more trucks on the road. They're damaging the roads, but there are not enough trucks going around to, sorry, I got load shedding here as I was talking about load shedding. But there are not enough trucks to transport the goods fast enough because the ports are clogged, the railway system is falling apart, and so on. And Transnet needs about 100 billion rand in order to finance its turnaround strategy. So that's an example of some of the basics. The third example that I will make has got to do with the state of municipalities. When we hear from the Auditor General that municipalities are in trouble, they are dysfunctional, their finances are poor, and that sort of thing, that affects the viability of businesses. It is difficult to have a sustainable business in Coffee Bay, on the other side of where I come from, when the road is so bad. There is no water sewerage system in Coffee Bay at all. People still use septic tanks and that sort of thing. And the electricity supply is erratic. It's a distance of 100 kilometers from Tata, thereabouts about 95 kilometers. It can take you over 2 hours to get there. Now, and your car gets damaged in the process. So, what am I saying? Let us get the basics right so that the economy can function. So that's what I mean. Then there is crime. It is difficult to have businesses opening in crime-infested area, and many of our communities are becoming crime-infested and so on. And on top of that, we do not provide enough support to entrepreneurs who want to start a business, right? Somebody has got a brilliant idea. It's not just the money. I can have a brilliant idea, but if I cannot start and build a business properly because I have received no training support, no mentorship, no guidance at all, chances are even when I get the loan, it is going to work against me in the end. Now, this is not to say, no, don't give people capital. All we're saying is give people proper support together with the funding. Then the businesses have a better opportunity of surviving. It's also about helping people understand what kind of businesses they should open in a particular context. Where you have too many event management companies, where there are very few events, you're going to have a problem, right? The last one I want to make is the emphasis around municipal and regional infrastructure. For instance, I made an example about Coffee Bay. A taxi that can only do 2 trips a day, if that road were to improve, can make 4 to 5 trips a day. Now, that business makes more money, there's more commercial activity because the hassle has been removed and so on. This is not to say this is the only thing that we're saying. I am illustrating our approach to how we think about this kind of solution. The last thing I want to speak about before I shut up is climate change. And climate change is usually framed as an issue about whether we should have coal or not. Let me make an example. I come from a village. My family are subsistence farmers, and everybody in the village is. The rain patterns have changed. It either doesn't rain at all for a while or it rains too much. I am not sure the quality of the seeds that we use. We plant maize and beans and pumpkins. I'm not sure about the quality of the seeds. Are they resilient enough for the kind of climate that we're having? Are we planting at the right time? And so the climate change discussion risk is affecting food security, for instance. And if I had to tell you about my area, very few people are going to have a harvest in June. Very few people are going to have a harvest in June, and those who get a harvest in June, it's going to be tiny. And anybody who's listening who comes from the villages will know, the villages of the Eastern Cape list will know this is true. That's one example. The second example of why the climate crisis is important is that if you previously your premium on insurance on your home, I don't know, let us say it was 1,000 rand, you probably pay 1,400 rand. Soon you'll pay 1,500. Why? Because of flooding, especially if you're in KZN. So it hits you where? It hits you in the pocket. So we've recognized climate change as a risk that erodes a well-being, it erodes health, it erodes economically, and so on. And we have to tackle it. We can't just listen to people who are saying that, yeah, we want coal. That's not all there is to climate change and recovering the environment. There are many facets which affect ordinary South Africans. So we decided to therefore take into account what people are telling us and also express these issues in a way that also is relatable to people. The last example I'm going to make is about spatial planning and land justice. Before we expropriate, which we support, we must expropriate in terms of our own constitution because it allows us to do so. But we must work out where we need land. For what purpose do we need land? Some people need land to build a home. Some people need land for commercial purposes. Some people need land for small scale farming. Some people may need land for large scale farming. As an example, when you expropriate, you do proper planning so that you know where you need to expropriate, where you don't need to expropriate. Otherwise, you're just doing it willy nilly. So, let me give you an example about my village. And again, everybody who comes from all over the Eastern Cape, that part of the Eastern Cape, will know that pastoral land where we used to take our cattle and sheep and so on is reducing because land is being allocated for residential purposes. Over time, people no longer have sheep and goats and cattle because there's no grazing land. There's too much soil erosion and so on. That's one example of unplanned spatial or land distribution. The second example is somebody is sick. It's 11 p.m. The ambulance is trying to find them. There are no roads in between. The sites are unmarked. There are no street lights. There is no tap water and that sort of thing. So some of these things that we regard as normal are not normal, and we must learn to fix them and work with them differently. So anyway, let me stop there. How I hope I have given people a sense of how we constructed the manifesto, some of the things that we've chosen, why we frame them the way we do, and how we try and make them relatable for people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I mean, that was really brilliant. I think I want to go back to the issue of leadership, just for you to unpack, because South Africans have for a very long time been denied the opportunity to keep leaders accountable, especially politicians. How does a Rise Mzansi government like foresee people keeping politicians? We are asking people to send us to parliament. We are asking people to send us to legislatures. How do we solve for the issue of accountability?
So there, I'll make two examples, and our proposals again. There's more to our proposals, but just two examples. The first is changing the electoral system. This is really important. As long as people only need to please the people inside their party in order to stay in parliament, they are never going to be accountable. They're just never going to be accountable. Let us say hypothetically, Rise Mzansi wins the election. And I also happen to sit on the National Leadership Committee, and we're going to go through a process of what the list looks like. Now, assuming we win, and let us say I become a minister or whatever, become a president, the people that are supposed to oversee me are the people that we've also determined where they are on the list, right? Or whether next time they will be there or not. That does not work. You can't choose your own invigilator and set the rules. Who must choose the oversight is the people. That means we must divide South Africa into constituencies so that people can hold each MP accountable and say, you called that thing in Kandla a fire pool, is not, it's a swimming pool. Why did you do it? That is the most important oversight, but it means that we change the rules. The last thing I would say, how is this? Nothing beats government transparency. What do I mean by that? If people knew because the municipality was forced to publish all contracts over R1,000,000 or 500,000 every quarter. After a while, you see that, hang on, how's company is getting all the contracts here? And now you can ask questions. Aibu, why are you getting all the contracts? Why are they going to this one person? Oh, he's a cousin. Right. So changing the rules and also government transparency is important so that people cannot fight for something they can't see. So that's one of our approaches. Huh?
Awesome. And I think there's quite a few questions, but before we get into them, I think linked to that question is also the issue of corruption. And I'm not
Yes.
just talking about corruption on the fire pool side, but I'm also talking about the corruption on the ground. People are having to pay jojo or whatever you call it to get their licenses. You pass, but you don't. That's how rampant the corruption is. And I think it's important for us to also understand what's Rise and Mzansi's vision in getting rid of that in the time that we have.
You mean for getting rid of corruption?
Yeah, I think it's part of our manifesto. There's a section about keeping people safe
Yes.
and restoring the rule of law. So it's that theme. Yeah.
So to simplify, we need to do a couple of things. The first is that we believe that you must start by cleaning up at the top. So, for instance, people know there's police corruption. Even the senior generals are corrupt. You cannot chase constables and sergeants around when the generals are corrupt. Start with the generals. Basically, clean up the people who do the oversight. Make sure they do proper oversight, and the rest of the thing is going to be clean. That's one of the reasons our slogan for this election is we need new leaders, because you need to get your leadership right, change the rules to hold even the new leadership more accountable, and then you'll begin to see progress against corruption. That's one. The second thing is, once someone has made a protected disclosure, let us say you have a job somewhere, that employer must not be allowed to discipline and remove you. They must keep paying you until that investigation is complete. If you make a protected disclosure, in other words, you blow the whistle, there is substance to the allegations, maybe you are feeling unsafe, because what gets used? The victimization gets used, it's money. Will deprive you of your salary, will find a reason to get rid of you. Now, that doesn't get used properly, even now. So, we must strengthen protection for whistleblowers. And this new rule, this new law that has been sitting on the presidency, that's the Protection of State Information Bill, is another instrument that can be used to victimize whistleblowers. I was still a journalist when I told my colleagues that, guys, this law is not about media freedom. It's about democracy. The people who are going to be the biggest victims are not the media. It's the people who provide information to the media. And we need to speak primarily in defense of those people, because we're not doing this for fun. We're doing it because it's important for democracy itself. So let me stop there so that I don't give a long answers.
No worries. I think also linked. It's just remarkable how everything is linked, right? But the
Yeah.
issue of BEE comes up a lot, and I think what Rise Mzansi has said is that it hasn't really benefited the beneficiaries it was intended to benefit. And I think
Yeah.
Diane here wants to know what the manifesto says about BEE and our position on that.
So will we continue to have Black economic empowerment? Yes, absolutely. But this is how we understand Black economic empowerment. And we're going to go through the income stratas quickly. One, there are people who are denied economic opportunities virtually from birth. They don't have proper ECD facilities. They don't have access to proper education. They don't have access to proper education support and that sort of thing. Most of those are black. And by black, I mean the broad range of blackness, colored, Indian, and so on. So please, I don't just mean people who look like me here. I mean South Africans who are regarded as previously disadvantaged but are still disadvantaged even now. It's very important that we do not leave those people behind and only take care of people like myself who've had a high school education, have a tertiary education, worked in corporate, and so on. I'm still coming to employment equity, but it's very important that education, nutrition, ECD, and other support and skills training is available to people for whom it is denied. You can't be empowered when you can't even find a job because you don't have skills, right? You need to be able to be given a good start in life. That's important, number one. Number two, we must look to empower and finance more entrepreneurs. In other words, focus on how and her new business. She's a black woman, or colored woman, or whatever. Brilliant idea. You want how to grow and eventually list that business. Focus on supporting entrepreneurs, especially at a micro level. Those informal businesses must eventually become formal and big. I don't like this township economy term, right? No, the people in the townships must go and eat in something too, right? They must have customers in something. That's how our mindset needs to change. So that is the second thing. The third thing is about ownership of the big assets in the economy. We believe that is the role of workers, pension funds that amount to hundreds of billions in South Africa. They're being misdirected. Now, if you want to strategically influence the direction of a large company, workers must, through their asset management companies, direct those investments in those companies. You begin to transform the economy. But you can't take 10 billion rand in state money, give it to one person to buy 3% of a big company. Doesn't work, right? So, do we want to diversify ownership of the economy? By all means. The last thing I want to say is, guys, corruption and cronyism are not BEE. Let's not confuse the two. So don't give me an example of a corruption deal and say that was not a BEE deal. That was a corruption deal. We need to do black economic empowerment properly.
And I think just linked to that, before I go to the other question, it's around, I mean, we've been traveling around the country, around the province, talking to many people, including young people. And one of the things that we've found is that a lot of the young people they don't have matric, but they do have skills and they cannot find employment. I do know that in our manifesto we talk about upskilling people who have no matric. Can you just unpack for us why is that such a priority for us?
So if we just talk about youth unemployment and we don't define the problem properly, then we're going to have a problem. 89% now in the latest survey from last quarter of people who are unemployed either just have matric or no matric at all. Now, if we really want to create employment opportunities, we must ask the question differently. How do we stimulate economic activity in sectors and in ways in which people who either just have matric or no matric at all can find work? As an example. So you need to frame the problem accordingly. Now, would you take a decision? And that's one of the things we say in our manifesto. We are going to make sure that every person has a skill that can help them to find a job. That is why we are talking about training 1 million people, especially young people, within 5 years. Solving youth unemployment is not about solving youth unemployment is not about denying people who are 35 years old the opportunity to find a job, which is some of what our government does. Provide people with proper education. Those who don't have enough education, they must be able to have a skill. At least when you're looking for work or you want to start a business, you've got a skill that you can, and then you can get help.
Absolutely. Another very interesting sort of issue that keeps coming up. It also came up this week when we went to a community in Waterworks informal settlement. People keep talking about how the 350 doesn't work. And obviously, we don't talk about a 350 grant in our manifesto, but can you maybe explain to us how Rise Mzansi sees? I mean, obviously, we want to create jobs, but what is not working about the 350 grant and what do people actually need?
350 is not enough to begin with. It's not enough. It's like the job. So if you just said, you know what, I know people spend too much getting to work, but let's just give them a job. If they've got a job, they can take care of themselves. But there are no clinics, they have to buy their own medication, all of these kind of things, right? We have to target specific problems. So for instance, provide people with training opportunities where they do not have to pay first. Second, Once somebody has undergone that training, you provide them with a grant, a job seekers grant for 6 months so that they can look for a job. What do? Print CVs, buy airtime, data, get taxi fare to go and look for work. But you need to have gone through the program. You need to have gone through the program, or you need to have been retrenched and you now have exhausted your UIF. The thing that kicks in after that is your job seekers grant to help find a job, because there are people who are not able to do what, who are not able to look for work because they don't even have money to look for work. Last example I want to use how is a, for instance, apart from zero rating VAT, if somebody is on a social security card, in the same way that a Woolies card is able to do, why can't that person get a discount on certain types of foodstuffs at Pick and Pay, at Boxer, or whatever retail store when they swipe, so that that food can go further? Now you have a package of social support measures that support different aspects of that person's life, rather than saying, yes, 350, sort yourself out.
But we don't have money. That's the
No,
question.
we don't, but how we don't have money, but we also need to choose what we're going to spend money on. There are people perhaps on this webinar who feel that the government must own banks and so on, right? Must own lots of things. But then in the end, the government doesn't have money to provide people with food. And ideologically, we are happy that we own 100% of Transnet, but people die by suicide and so on because they are too hungry. No, we rather that than feed people. Let me just pose a question, and it's just an example of the kind of thinking that we need. Let us say the South African government were to say, we own the roads, we are going to continue owning all the railways in South Africa, but we are going to ask private investors, especially the pension funds, to buy the locomotives and the trains, operate them under concession to the government, and we set the rules and we set the pricing of how that is going to work. Now, suddenly, where the government did not have 200 billion, you might have 200 billion rand for that purpose. It's an example. That means the money that you save from that can now go to all of these things. So we need to change the way we understand. This is not to say privatize everything. It is to say set rules for private capital to be invested. Last example I'm going to make is about power generation. The government sets the electricity price in South Africa. The government, NERSA, the National Energy Regulator of South Africa, sets the price. Now, is it a problem if we encourage private investors to use their own money to generate electricity and we set the price as the government, right? We can do that. Otherwise, we must wait until the government has money one day and then do it while people starve and go without jobs. So all I'm saying is we must understand the role of the government. It takes us back to strong leadership, strong government. Because when you've got a strong leadership and strong government, you can regulate the economy more effectively.
Staying on that topic, I think it's Gael wants to know, what is your policy on economic refugees?
I am assuming these are people who come from other countries to South Africa for economic reasons. So I would rather use migration for economic reasons. Migration for economic reasons. I don't want to call them refugees. You know why? Because there are South African nurses in Saudi Arabia. I don't think they call them refugees there, right? Human beings will always travel to look for economic opportunity. I ended up in Gauteng from the Eastern Cape for better economic opportunities. I am not a refugee. I am an internal economic migrant. In an ideal world, I would like to be in the Eastern Cape next to where my mother is because she's getting on in years and still be doing very well. So I discourage the word refugee. But what am I saying? Every country has to make its decision in terms of what skills and capacity it needs and make sure that we've got enough of those skills, whether they are from South Africa or not. Let me make an example. There are not enough urologists in the Eastern Cape. I don't think there are enough urologists in the country. We can wait until one day we've got urologists, or we can provide opportunities for 300 urologists from outside South Africa to be here to provide high quality care to South Africans. Those people are not refugees. They are contributing to the well-being of South Africans. They will pay tax, they will buy houses here, that sort of thing. I hope I've given you an answer. They're not refugees. Let us look at our needs and admit people accordingly. What is wrong is for any and everyone to come here, have any and every job, whether there is a surplus or not, because some employers want to exploit the vulnerability of some of people from other countries and pay them slave wages. That is wrong.
And I think linked to that, sorry, I'm sifting through questions while listening to you. I think linked to that, before we move to the next question by Willem, is our immigration policy. Could you be and how we plan to manage the whole immigration issue? We know that it's a contested issue. There's a lot of people talking about immigration and so on. What has Rise Mzansi set out?
So I need to say this carefully so that I'm not misunderstood. Our biggest problem is not migrants, it's the immigration system. It is inefficient, it is corrupt. So what do I mean by that? If someone is able to be married to Khao without Khao knowing, there is a South African who is helping them to get a South African ID in that way. You are not going to solve the problem if you don't solve it like that. So that's number one. Secondly, if we are not able to have proper visa and immigration administration here, it's going to be a problem, right? In other words, somebody comes in as a tourist, they stay like 20 years on a 3-month tourist visa. If you come in as a tourist, you must be able. How do you solve that? We must be able to enforce immigration laws, which has got to do with corruption, it's got to do with capacity. So that's important. In other words, let's apply the rule of law in the way in which we should, and then we're going to have less of a problem. Then there are people that are already here but are undocumented. It is important that all of those people are documented. It is important that we understand who is a persona non grata there. What do I mean? If somebody is running away from committing crimes where they are, and now they are here, they must go. If somebody is involved in crime here, again, apply the law and so on, right? So that is the second thing. If somebody needs to apply for refugee status, we must set a reasonable timetable so they can apply for refugee status and be given an answer. Sometimes we turn people into illegal immigrants because the system is taking too long for them to get the papers that they need. I also want to ask that we are compassionate. What do I mean by that? There are children who were born here, have never been to Mozambique, or let me give an example. In Guatemala, a few weeks ago, I came across a young lady. She passed matric with a university entrance. She does hair. She's a hairstylist in a container. Her parents were from Mozambique. She was born here. She passed matric here without an ID. So she said on her certificate is not. She cannot go to university because she doesn't have an ID. She cannot find formal employment because she does not have an ID. Now, if you want to be frustrated, we can say just send it to Mozambique, we don't care. I don't think we should do that. We must regularize people like that. We really must. What does that mean? You were born in South Africa, you must get a South African ID, even if your parents remain Mozambican. But the person who was born here and has only ever lived in South Africa. The last point I want to make how is really important. When there used to be the Bantustan called Transkei, there were lots of teachers from Ghana and Tanzania. Those people stayed and they never left. We must be very careful of saying anyone who does not have a surname that sounds like a South African surname must go. Those people got here in 1980, 1981, 82. They have intermarried with us. They are Xhosa speaking children who are Asamoa or Amoa, whatever the case is. Please let us be careful of Afrophobia and all not wanting to understand the complexities of South African life and apply the law properly and not be Afrophobic or xenophobic.
Thank you. Willem has a question around Transnet. How do we fix it? Where do we start?
The first is we need to get new leaders. We have needed, not a Transnet in the country, we have needed a chief executive at Transnet for how long? We still don't have one. There is a turnaround that needs to be financed with 100 billion, but there's no leadership. If you were an investor, Willem, in other words, you are a pension fund, you are the National Union of Mine Workers Provident Fund, you want to invest in Transnet, but there's no leadership. Why would you invest in Transnet? You wouldn't, right? If you are going to invest in Transnet, you're going to charge a high interest as it is happening. So how much is Transnet paying per month? 1 billion rand. So fix the leadership in the government. This is in our manifesto, by the way, get into those state-owned companies, boards that can appoint competent management to turn those institutions around. Change how you think about investment in private enterprises in the manner that I was explaining earlier. And most importantly, get rid of those criminal syndicates that cripple Transnet, Eskom, and other such enterprises who charge too much for services they do not deliver properly because they've got political connections. You will find that Transnet has got the right leadership, pays good value for money, and has got good investors who are able to participate in its corporate decision making because workers' pension funds and so on are invested in those, and those asset managers have the ability to nominate and vote for members of the board so that the thing is not just run by people appointed by politicians.
This is an interesting one. Before you answer it, I think it was a week ago, we went to a community and a mother raised such an important issue that I hadn't even thought about. But she was saying that, some young people in the community, they sell drugs because they are unemployed. And I think this is a big one for us as well in our manifesto that we tackle.
And also use drugs. And there are mental health challenges. So one of the first young people to stand up and speak in our Rise Mzansi tour in April, she's a Rise Mzansi activist now, she raised mental health issues. She explained it so eloquently about how young people end up getting involved with drugs in different ways. So when we spoke about community and community infrastructure and facilities, it is partly to end up solving part of that problem. Secondly, giving people a proper education with proper support. That's also helpful. Thirdly, even when someone has not finished school, giving them the opportunity for proper skills training and the opportunity to find a job. Fourth, treat drug addiction as a public health issue, not as a criminal issue. Somebody who's an addict has an addiction, like alcohol addiction and all of these kind of things. Have a public health response to it. Finally, prosecute drug dealers, especially the people who run the drug rings, and punish them accordingly. It's not easy, I know, but we've got to learn and chew gum at the same time. Chew gum and walk.
Absolutely. The question is, what is Rise Mzansi stance on illegal guns that are all over our streets? We are experiencing armed robberies, CTIs. I think you get the gist. I mean, I think I saw some videos on Twitter just recently of people just wielding guns in the street, especially in the Western Cape.
So there is a culture of gun violence in South Africa. And you often see now, it's even a status thing to walk around with big guns. You have bodyguards who are basically intimidating. And those are the characters the government needs to start with. The president is the most protected person in South Africa. His or her bodyguards do not brandish rifles. Outlaw that thing. Secondly, we need to give people an amnesty again for providing us with firearms that may or may not have been used in crime, and those crimes are investigated accordingly. Thirdly, assuming the police are not corrupt, there must be very strict laws for gun possession, one, and secondly, whether we punish people or not when they brandish firearms irresponsibly, because that also corrupts the culture that you have. In the United States, anyone can walk around with a gun, and you got lots of mass shootings. That's what happens when you perpetuate that culture of people just carrying guns and anybody can buy a gun. It's not an easy one, though, because it also has to do with socioeconomic conditions. People with better opportunity and better hope for the future are less likely to fall into the trap of gangs and so on because there are possibilities in life. And we must not forget that. That is why Rise Mzansi's centerpiece in the manifesto is individual, family, and community well being.
And many people ask, I mean, you've never, as Rise Mzansi, been in government.
Yeah.
If miraculously you are, I mean, how are you going to do all of this? You don't have the experience, you don't have the track record. Why should we trust what you say?
So in 1994, the apartheid government had been in power for 48 years. And then another political party won the election. It was called the African National Congress. They had never been in government, but they'd made very sharp observations about what was wrong with South Africa and how to fix it. They also focused in the beginning on employing competent people to do the work, some of whom later became captains of industries, etc. For instance, the new chairperson of Transnet is not new anymore, Andile Sango, was a deputy director general in the first government, right? He's a chartered accountant, highly skilled person of high integrity, and so on, right? So we must not be afraid of change. You need people with fresh ideas. We've made fresh observations, and the Rise Mzansi government would be able to attract the kind of quality that is scared of the ANC right now.
I think another important one is around the whole in one generation. South Africans are obviously impatient, rightfully so. It's been a long time. We
Yeah.
recently talked about 15 wasted years after the SONA. But why is it so important to understand that we will do this in one generation? If you can just unpack that for us as well.
So it is important to be honest with the South African people. If we were to say we can solve all of these problems in 5 years, we would be lying. For instance, if you want to change the ECD system in South Africa and education and so on, it's going to take a long time, 2-3 parliamentary cycles, right? 15 years, you begin to see very big differences, right? But you start somewhere. So it was important to be realistic and honest with the South African people. The goal we must set ourselves is a child born in 2024 must have different life prospects by the time they finish university. That would be progress. So that in their own lifetime, I was born into lack of opportunity. I am now starting to work and I've got lots of opportunities. That's change.
And I see Sia just put this question, and I know you covered a bit of crime, but he's asking, how does the manifesto propose to address heinous crimes in the immediate, not in the long term? The long term way is sure leadership, but what do we do immediately? And I think this is the what I've been talking about, that people
No,
obviously
no, no,
want.
no, absolutely. So, what do we say in the manifesto? We say in the manifesto that we need to change the police leadership. That's important, right? And I mean, there are socioeconomic issues. So let's leave those. The reason people commit such violent crimes is because they know the chances of being arrested are very slim. You're just not going to get arrested. Detectives have a huge caseload. From car theft to murder and rape, that same detective is investigating 35 cases. So the capacity to investigate crimes and arrest people is quite slim. Let me give you an example. The people that invaded the US Parliament or Congress in whenever they 2021, have been arrested. They looked for them, arrested them, charged them, tried them, sent them to prison. Some of them are out now. In South Africa, we are still prosecuting Jacob Zuma from 2006. Judge John Slope took how long? So what am I saying? Improve police capacity, improve prosecutor capacity, improve court capacity. Let's have a more electronic systems to integrate between prosecutors, the courts, and the police, information gathering, information analysis, use AI, and so on. If somebody commits a crime, they must know that there's a 90% chance that I'm going to get arrested. And I can't buy the docket to get at. Otherwise, you're going to see more and more violent crimes, because all it does is, if I want to just beat up someone and get away with it, I pay 5,000 rand bribe. If I want to murder someone and get away with it, I pay 100,000. Either way, I get away with it. So unfortunately, there is no one size fits all. And if we are hoping death penalty, no. Death penalty will simply make the bribe 250,000. People will still get away with it.
Absolutely. And Raquel wants to know, what is Rise's Mzansi stance on the NHI?
So we need an intervention like the NHI, particularly to provide specialized care to people who don't have access to it. What the NHI is not going to resolve is the fact that, let me use my village again. So if somebody is sick, they must go to the Tulele hospital in one direction to my right here, and the road is bad. Get there, get diagnosed, they do triage and so on. They decide, no, they must refer you to Mthat. Now you get referred. You drive past my home, 40 kilometers in the other direction. When you get there, you still don't have the specialists you need, because in the whole area, you don't have certain types of specialists. It's not about gaining access to the private hospital. So what are we saying? Ultimately, what we have to do for 95% of people is to give them access to proper modern medical facilities belonging to the government. That's what we need to do. So in Lutubeni, there is no doctor. The NHI doesn't help you there. It's not like you can go to a doctor within 30 kilometers. There isn't one. You must go to Mkanduli town. And if it's nighttime, there's no doctor, you must travel another 40 kilometers. The NHI doesn't help you. Let us put medical facilities where the people are. They must work well. Nurses and other medical staff have proper working conditions so that they are highly motivated and so on. But have a state insurance system for specialized care that people otherwise don't have across both the private and public sectors.
Thank you so much. We have 2 minutes or so left. And I think for me, lastly, I'm watching this. You have my vote, but what is your stance on coalitions? Are you willing to go into coalition with anybody, and especially the ANC?
So two quick answers. How? If the ANC does not get above 50%, in other words, the South African people collectively have decided the ANC should not get the majority. Our advice to ourselves and to anyone else, we must be very careful about resurrecting the ANC and putting them back in power. Having said that, who we partner with has to be mature. Frankly, I don't care, and we don't care about ideological similarities. Coalitions are supposed to work like this. We all go out and maximize our votes. And then once the election is complete, you are mature enough to get together with your competitors, place your top 5 issues on the table. They place their top 5 issues on the table. And whichever combination of political parties is able to accept those principles, then you can address 70-80% of the needs of the South African people. For instance, if part of the deal is certain people are not going to be prosecuted for corruption, because Tina, we want the top dogs to be prosecuted. As an example.
Thanks.
So the principles at a practical level are important, much more than the ideology of whether the state should own everything or not. The state is not going to own everything. We don't have enough money. let's move on.
Thank you so much. Your last your last word was right at 2 o'clock. So thank you so much for this session. I think a lot of people enjoyed it. I couldn't put all the comments in, but thank you so much for joining us. The call to action is we must all rise. This has been a date, and I think our next date is on the 29th of May 2024, where we choose our future to put it in our hands. And as we always say, Rise Mzansi is the vehicle you can use to do that. So thank you for joining us. There will be a whole lot of more engagements that we'll be having. So stay tuned to our social media channels and our WhatsApp channel. And again, thank you so much, Mr. Zibi, for joining us and unpacking. We really, really appreciated it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.